Imagine a world with a form of capital that would prioritize social returns over financial returns. The social stock exchange, the current buzzword of the development sector, was introduced as a concept in India in 2019. It is said to unlock large pools of funding by enabling the marriage of commercial capital and social capital. As we are gripped by the coronavirus pandemic, we're aware of the devastating impact it has had on human life. Now more than ever, there is a need for social capital to rebuild the livelihoods of thousands in the country. And the social stock exchange has the capacity to do just that.
Transforming nonprofits with Sattva Consulting.
This is your host Niharika Gudedi, and today we'll be unpuzzling the social stock exchange, covering where the concept came from, how it functions, and what it has in store for the nonprofit sector. To help us unpuzzle the SSE, we have with us the co-founder and partner of Sattva Consulting, Aarti Mohan. Aarti heads the foundations vertical at Sattva that works closely with foundations, multilaterals, and their ecosystems to deliver impact. She has over 12 plus years of experience spanning consulting, research, content creation, and business leadership, leading multiple engagements, bringing together funders, philanthropists, foundations, and nonprofits. She also has experience in leading flagship research projects that investigate impact funding markets and philanthropic funding continuums in India and Asia, something especially crucial to our conversation today.
So thanks for joining us today, Aarti. Just to start off with, could you tell us a little bit more about what the social stock exchange is? Where did this idea originate from?
So world over, there are a few countries that have picked up the social stock exchange itself as a construct in the early 2000s, like UK, Brazil, South Africa, and Canada. They all have some form or manner of social stock exchanges. Well, there are other countries in Asia and elsewhere that have taken specific products. I think the value lies in the combination of the two. The fact that you can bring together innovative financial instruments, and two, you can have very diversified actors plowing in capital in a very scalable way, into investable opportunities.
That's super helpful, Aarti. Could you tell us a little bit more about what is the context of the SSE in India? How did it come to be over here?
The idea was to see how can we further expand the opportunity for private capital to contribute to impact. Let's say I'm someone who's really passionate about climate change. How can I invest in it tomorrow? At the same time, there might be a set of organizations that are looking at an interesting program in climate change and try and harness potential of unrestricted capital as well. Today we have the philanthropic capital, we've got the retail investing, and we got mainstream capital. So both mainstream institutional capital, mainstream retail capital, how can they plow better into social impact opportunities that impact social and economic returns is the idea that was floated.
In this context, you just mentioned that the idea was to bring innovation to scale and to bring private funding into the development sector. So are these the primary reasons why this is the moment for SSE in India? Could you tell us a little bit more about why and how is India's social sector positioned to adopt the SSE?
India has one of the largest and most vibrant social impact ecosystems globally, right? Like we have 20 million social enterprises, out of which 400,000 of them file tax. Even if we do take 3.3 billion as a very, very large estimate, regularly generate income from donations and other social impact funding. We have over 2.2 million people that work in the social impact sector in India. For a sector like this, the number of investable products and opportunities we have is limited. If you look at it broadly, there's institutional capital, there's individual capital. Institutional capital comes to us from the whole impact investing ecosystem, right from family foundations to then large global foundations to impact investors. Then there is individual capital, which is literally retail giving, donations and so on. Now, social stock exchange can actually bring together both the diversity of instruments and the diversity of investing means and investors into what is one of the largest social impact ecosystems in the world. I think that's the most compelling reason to have a social stock exchange, because there needs to be importance given to get more people to be, more organizations, more parts of the ecosystem to be able to use that capital and then maximize the ROI is an opportunity. Now, how can me invest in such an opportunity? In the current circumstances, there's almost no way to do that.
One of the things that you said is putting together the investing means with the investor. Can you tell us a little bit more about what exactly is the difference between then a regular NSE and a BSE and a social stock exchange? If you could really break that down for us and tell us what is the social stock exchange and how is it different from our conventional stock exchanges?
So you need to have tradable commodities, something that can be traded. That's the fundamental principle of a stock exchange, whether social or not. A stock exchange is able to give a certain rating, which gives you an understanding of what is the performance of that particular stock or that particular company. And you invest in that. You invest in the promise as much as what is the current. Now, what is that in social impact terms is still has to be figured out. The sector is not homogenized by any kind of reporting formats, right? That is not at all there in India. There is no regulator or any kind of an association either, which brings together all the non-profits that work for social impact on the ground in India. Given this, which are the investable organizations or the equivalent of companies? What are then the ratings or the impact performance? And 3, what is being traded? So all of this are being figured out and designed today as we speak.
One more thing that I wanted to understand from you based on what you said is talking about tradable commodities. So can you delve a little bit deeper on what are these tradable commodities? Do you have a sense of who are the stakeholders who are accessing this platform and the various players that are involved? And if you could even tell us a little bit more about how exactly is this beneficial to the different kind of players?
So the impetus for the social stock exchange, given the current state of the social impact ecosystem, is threefold, right? One, it unlocks a greater diversity of capital for nonprofits, and given we have $565 billion shortfall in reaching our targets to the SDGs, every penny and every kind of capital is going to count. And given also the pandemic and this year where we are seeing a lot of different navigations of we are currently witnessing in terms of social impact funding, we know that the funding itself could be limited in volume. Given that, there is a big focus to unlock capital, unlock the right kind of capital for nonprofits. 2 is, in terms of just being able to do any kind of slice of survey among any kind of nonprofits, you will find that nonprofits struggle with capital. Consistent funding and unrestricted grants, multi-year grants where they have visibility and can start a more substantive piece of work and go for it are limited, and even more in this environment. It becomes even more scarce if we look at the kind of issues. Education receives 1/3 of all the CSR funding that goes out today. Whereas if you look at gender, it's a few hundred crores, right? Like there is a dimensional difference in the kind of funding that goes for certain causes. So the social stock exchange could hopefully then be able to offer funding to a much, much more diverse set of causes and set of organizations. 3 is the fact that it is also highlighting impact, and there is more appetite among investors, more and more among philanthropic foundations, to have systemic impact, to have transformational impact, to have large-sized impact. Now then the question of therefore what is impact and being able to pay for that performance, pay for that impact is critical, and this appetite is very much growing. So the social stock exchange will also allow a large ecosystem and efforts around being ready to list on a platform that pays for performance and pays for impact, and or rather is able to highlight that performance and impact in a much more of a substantive.
I think one of the things I'm still curious about. So I recently attended the social stock webinar that was being conducted by Omidyar Network, right? And there were nonprofit leaders there who were speaking about how they go through a lot of regulations. So they have a lot of documentation that they need to file to different government bodies, different state bodies, different national bodies, right? And that is actually a hindrance to them because they have these multiple donors who require their own reporting standards. And then they have government registrations, which are also multifold, right? So in that context, could you tell me a little bit more about how this reporting standard could actually benefit nonprofits? And just in that vein, what are the kinds of benefits that nonprofits would actually gain from this, right? Because I feel like there is a fear, while nonprofits do require funding, there is a kind of fear that this will just be another reporting standard on top of them. So taking on the nonprofit lens, how do you think this will benefit nonprofits?
That's an interesting question. See, this kind of an effort hopefully is going to address both the supply side and demand side intervention that can make this happen, right? Like one, on from the demand side, investors, they see a particular set of formats that have been vetted and designed by credible organizations, have a pan-India adoption, then it is also going to reduce the cost of understanding impact among CSR and among family foundations, among the whole continuum of investors that are investing today in social impact. So on the demand side, therefore, there could be a lot more of an acceptance and convergence towards credible standards and benchmarks that come in and indicators that then say that this is the nature of it and this is the extent. On the supply side, if nonprofits were to do this one by one, it's completely cost ineffective and it's not something they want to spend their time on, and they want to spend their time on doing the work on. Two, for any other body to come up with this might not find buy-in. But if you bring together an exchange that will then create a pool of organizations, efforts, and intermediaries that can not just design the framework and have it vetted, but also execute this framework for nonprofits at a certain cost, and these are empaneled credible agencies, then you're bringing down the cost of reporting for the nonprofit supply side as well.
That's super helpful to know that both from the supply and demand side, actually, this would be such a needed change and a needed wave in the development sector. But one question that I think I still hold is that will this in any way be disruptive to nonprofits? They know that there will be large scale impact that can be created and large pools of capital that will get unlocked. But is there a potential for disruption?
Well, if we are worried about whether the current funding pools will get affected, we don't think so, because you can choose not to list, and in the beginning, I think it will grow over time. It's not going to be scale on day one. So therefore, I think that's something that's definitely not going to be disruptive in that way. But two, the hope is also that it's going to invite a lot more newer sort of investors to invest in the sector. So given that that disruption is actually positive, then one can encourage nonprofits to have this as an additional avenue of funding. Continue with your regular pool of funders, but try and see if you can list on the stock exchange to avail of a new form of capital, or even to extend pools, even if it's to a very, very small extent in the beginning.
So having gone through the report closely, Aarti, do you have some things in your view that the report still needs to drive further clarity on, especially in the context of nonprofits? I think initially you were talking about how the reporting standard and what the traded commodity is still needs to be spelled out clearly. Do you have any more thoughts around what exactly in the report needs more clarity in the coming months?
Definitely, those three aspects are still being worked out, right? Like what kind of organizations can list, what is getting traded, and how do you understand the performance of the commodity that is being traded. These are the three aspects, and all three are being defined. What are due diligence standards? We hope that's going to come up. Who are investing organizations? We know that social venture funds can be set up, and we know that which are intermediary funds and they can list as listable entities. We also know that nonprofits can list, but what is the definition of a nonprofit? What is the definition of a social enterprise? What is the definition of a social venture? Have not yet been marked out. What is the organization that can list on the social stock exchange? That clarity is much needed. And secondly, there are lots of clarifications also around tax exemptions and so on. Is it 100% tax exempt, 50%? What are some of those reporting and tax rules
I think based on what you said, one of the more interesting aspects of this is kind of like going backwards, where you're going back and defining what is impact and who are nonprofits and what is a foundation, even though we have 3 million nonprofit enterprises. So I think that's really interesting to see that that's what the SSE can bring, a level of definition to the sector where it's much needed. For all the nonprofit leaders out there, given that the working committee report is out, there are still some gaps. What do you think we can tell them that they need to leverage to really make use of the SSC? So how will nonprofit leaders leverage this opportunity?
Nonprofit leaders can be part of, this entire thing is going to be a group effort. Once the Social Stock Exchange has been ratified and launched, which is what the public report is trying to get feedback for, then it's the start of the mission. So there will be a lot of working groups. Nonprofit leaders will definitely need to be part of it and need an opportunity. Both be a part of the process that's designing it, and two, as it comes up, it's also going to grow by adoption. So try and be a part of it in whatever form or manner is possible further.
Super. I think just before we end, I just had one last question, which is, what about the report or the Social Stock Exchange has piqued your interest? What has left you most curious?
It offers great potential and promise. The fact that after the first initial phase, it can open to literally every citizen in the country to invest, not just donate, right? It will invest in the social impact of their country. Just like I would invest in technology, with technology being the future, I would invest in infrastructure because infrastructure can grow my country. How about me investing in the social transformation and problems that are large but are being worked upon by an ecosystem that spans 3.3 million. Two is the innovative finance that can find its way into the social stock exchange, right? So that's the second thing that excites me about the social stock exchange, to start new things or test out certain new ways of doing things, therefore be able to unlock capital. So these are two areas that excite me.
Well, I for one am definitely looking forward to how SEBI is going to be incorporating all these recommendations into the next version of the report. SEBI has already set up a technical committee on the social stock exchange, which will develop a framework for onboarding profit and non-profit organizations, prescribing disclosure requirements relating to financials, governance, and performance. I hope this will shed a lot more clarity for all ecosystem players who are currently wondering how the SSE is going to transform their way of working. Thank you so much, Aarti, for joining us today, and thank you to all our listeners. See you next time.